possible.
Let's take one, but let's start with Haiti, because in many ways it's globally complex. And I think the chairman sort of alluded to this a moment ago. There's a fundamental problem in Haiti in that there is no legitimacy of authority. And I say this in recognition of the fact that some of the national police forces in Haiti have been extraordinarily brave. Despite being outgunned and outmanned, these guys and gals have stuck at their post and fought back against armed gangs. You know, when the most powerful person in any nation state is nicknamed barbecue, that is not a good thing. And this guy obviously is not named that for good reasons. He's not a cook. These are bad gang elements that are operating within Haiti and have destabilized not just Haiti, but threatened to destabilize the Dominican Republic, not to mention the migratory pressure that it places on the United States, on the Bahamas, and on other places in the region. There is no easy answer. The Kenyans are there, and I can tell you, I think they deserve a lot of credit for being willing to take on that mission. In recent days, missions from various other countries have arrived, El Salvador being among them, to sort of contribute to that effort. I don't think anyone can tell you they have a master plan for how you fix that overnight. I do think it does begin with stability and security. You've got to establish some baseline security, and it's not going to come from a U.S. military intervention. So to the extent that we can encourage foreign partners, and I would include foreign partners in the Western Hemisphere, who should be contributing to this effort, to provide some level of stability and security in Haiti so that you can explore the opportunities to have a transitional government that has legitimacy, that can ultimately lead to the conduct of elections, and then have governing bodies in that country that can bring about a nation state that can begin to build some of the things you need in order for permanency. But it's going to take a long time. And I say this with sadness in my heart. There have been good times and there have been bad times and worse times in Haiti, but sadly, there's not really been a golden era in Haiti's history, and your heart breaks for these people and for what they've gone through. But you also, as a policymaker in the United States, recognize the implications it's had on our country, not just in the migratory pressures it's placed on us, but as I pointed out earlier, the threat it poses on a daily basis to destabilizing the Dominican Republic. You mentioned Nicaragua. It's a very weird situation, for lack of a better term. The Sandinistas earlier, one of the first things they did in the new year is they kicked out every nun in the country. They've gone to war with the Catholic Church, which was the last institution in the country capable of standing up to them. But now they've begun this process of amending their fake constitution to basically create a family dynasty, so that Ortega and his wife will now be co-presidents. There's no democracy that's been completely wiped out. They have literally put plane loads of opposition figures and exported them here to the United States and around the world. They literally arrested anyone who signed up to run for president. They arrested every single, you signed up to run for president, they put you in jail. So it's a big challenge, but our national interest is most challenged. Number one, because of migratory pressure. Number two, because the Nicaraguan regime is allowing people to fly into Nicaragua visa-free from anywhere in the world and then transit to the United States. They have become the point of entry for people from all over the world, because you come in without any visa, they charge you $1,000 or whatever the going rate is today, and from there you get on the migratory route and into the United States. They have been direct contributors to the migratory crisis we face at our southern border. And the third is, the Nicaraguans have basically invited the Russians to establish a military naval presence in Nicaragua, in our hemisphere. That poses a threat to our national security. That needs to be addressed. Venezuela, sadly, is not governed by government. It's governed by a narco-trafficking organization that has empowered itself of a nation state. And we have seen, I believe, upwards of 7, 8, 9 million Venezuelans have just left the country. More are expected to leave. I was in strong disagreement with the Biden administration because they got played the way that I knew they would get played. They entered into negotiations with Maduro. He agreed to have elections. The elections were completely fake. They leveraged migration against us to get those concessions, and now they have these general licenses where companies like Chevron are actually providing billions of dollars of money into the regime's coffers, and the regime kept none of the promises that they made. So all that needs to be re-explored, because in Venezuela, you have the Russian presence, you have a very strong Iranian presence. The Iranians, in fact, are exploring, or in fact are beginning to build drone factories for the manufacture of Iranian drones in our own hemisphere. Not to mention the long practice of the Venezuelan regime of providing real but illegitimate passports to operatives for Hezbollah in our own hemisphere. And lastly, and I leave it lastly to Cuba because it's one that's been more enduring, The problem in Cuba basically is that despite being a communist regime and Marxism not working, is that they've decided, and they thought what they would do is that they would create this holding company. It's called Gaesa. It is a company that they own by the Cuban military, and that holding company owns everything that makes money in Cuba. If it makes money in Cuba, they own it, and it generates revenue for them. The Miami Herald just did an expose on Gaesa. And while you have electrical blackouts and you have all these other problems economically in Cuba, Gaesa is sitting on billions of dollars that they've generated for their permanency. In 2017, the Trump administration sanctioned Gaesa. Unfortunately, the Biden administration lifted some of those sanctions and restrictions a couple of years ago, which increased the amount of money they're able to generate through things like manipulating remittances and the like. And then yesterday, the Biden administration announced they were rescinding all of the sanctions on Gaesa, which basically the sanctions were this: you can do business with an independent individual Cuban, but you cannot, it's the regime that doesn't allow it. You cannot do business with anything owned by that government-run entity. And yesterday they lifted the sanctions on them. Now, the new administration is not bound by that decision, but nonetheless, that's what's in place. Ultimately, the reality, the moment of truth is arriving. Cuba is literally collapsing, both generationally in terms of all the young people leaving, but it's also collapsing economically. They are now living on 20 and 21-hour rolling blackout and some days longer because Marxism doesn't work, because they're corrupt, and because they're inept.